Well, good morning, Kortright. Nice to be with you, even though, again, it's virtually. We were in Canada this summer for a little bit, but we were not in Southern Ontario, so we didn't get to stop by and visit you. Um, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Ken. My wife Doreen and I have been supported by Kortright for a number of years as missionaries, serving with Avant Ministries. We live in Spain, but we oversee Avant's work in Europe and North Africa, and also through the Americas with a team of people. And Kortright has been a great support to our family over the years, not just financially and prayer, but when our oldest son moved to Guelph, he was there for about 2 years. He rented the Monseur's basement apartment and he went to Kortright, and people really looked after him. We greatly appreciated that as he transitioned really for the first time in his life from moving out of Europe. And so we've got news. If you follow our son Travis on Facebook, you've probably seen this. If not, Travis and his wife Katya are going to make Doreen and I grandparents for the first time in November. So that's something we're celebrating. And I'm sure that if you follow Doreen, I've got Doreen on Facebook, you're going to see Facebook inundated with pictures of a little boy from November, probably on into a long time. So thank you to Kortright for your support over for us um, over these many years. So we're going to continue on this morning, looking at some Psalms. If you want to look up Psalm 27, that's where I'm going to be. And I read an article. This would have been about a year and a half ago, that noted that the self-help industry in North America generates $10 billion of revenue every year. And it's no different in the UK or in any other Western country. And the interesting thing to me is that despite our culture constantly trying to tell us and sell us things by telling us you're worth it, by telling us you deserve it, we spend billions of dollars and euros and pounds reading books and going to seminars and listening to podcasts to try to prove to ourselves that this is true, that we're actually worth it, that I'm worth something. And psychologists have boiled down our issue to one of two things. Now, these are obviously generalizations, but generally, they say that women in the West suffer from low self-esteem and self-worth, and they're afraid that they're going to be rejected. Whereas men in the West also suffer from low self-esteem and self-worth, but their great fear is not rejection. It's that they're going to be found out and they're going to be exposed and people are going to see them as a fraud. And so these are the problems that this self-help industry is trying to help us get over. Now, if the self-help books were working, we should expect the industry to be creating less and less revenue every year, right? If you follow my logic there, because if they're making us feel more worth, if they're making us feel more assured of ourselves, if they're actually helping our self-image, we wouldn't need as many books and as many podcasts and as many seminars. But what we see is the opposite happening. The industry grows and grows and grows every year. So why aren't the self-help books and seminars and podcasts working? Well, I think one issue, and I think this maybe is to a large degree, it's because the secular self-help industry, it keeps trying to tell us that it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks of you. Just believe in yourself and you will feel better about yourself. But none of us can really live that out very well. We clearly develop our sense of self-worth externally in a community, right? If we're being shunned and our faults are being exposed, and if we're being ridiculed, we're ashamed and our self-worth starts to fall apart. And if we find ourselves in a place where other people are telling us we're worth something, well, maybe we start to believe it. Maybe we start to believe we're worth something, but we still fear the rejection and exposure. And I say maybe we start to feel it because our problem is a little bit more complex than just what it looks like on the surface. If I've tried and I've failed and everybody has seen it, I feel the shame. If I don't measure up and everybody knows it, I feel the shame. It makes me feel small. It makes me want to hide. But the issue is more insidious than that. It doesn't actually need to be exposed to be ridiculed and then to have a deep effect on it. Even the potential of being exposed or being rejected, having that possibility out there, has a deep effect on us. It's more like I feel like a failure, and I'm going to make sure I do everything to make sure nobody sees it. I don't feel I measure up, and I'm going to do anything to make sure that nobody sees this. And the effect is the same. It still makes me feel small. It still makes me want to hide. This is what part of Psalm 27 is going to address. And if this is going to be meaningful for us this morning, I think we need to think of some specifics. So think about this. What is it for you that if it was exposed to the world, you would think the verdict of the community would flood me with shame? I want to hide from them. I want to hide it from God. I even want to hide it from myself. And maybe there are multiple things that make you feel this way. I'm not going to leave you there because Psalm 27 has some really good news in it. And it repeats this phrase right in the middle of the psalm. It talks about seeking God's face. And when you read through the psalm, my guess is that this repetition of David, who's writing the psalm, saying, I seek God's face do I seek, don't hide your face from me. We probably just skip over it because it doesn't really make much sense to us. What is he actually asking? And recognizing that this was written by David in a distant culture a long time ago, there are some of these things that pop up in the Psalms that don't immediately make sense to us. It might make sense or even be clear to people today in Eastern cultures who have this concept of what we'll call face, and I'll explain that as we go along. But David's worth and his honor and his self-image, his identity, is going to be wrapped up in whether he seeks God's face and whether God shows him his face. So I want to look at the psalm and focus on David's desire to seek God's face. And don't mistake what I'm saying to be some kind of Christianized version of the power of positive thinking, because what I want us to see is that what God believes your worth is truly what your worth is. Whatever his answer is, he's right, and he's right in an objective way. So seek God's face. We're probably going to need to erase some preconceived notions of what this might mean. And to be completely honest, the first time I looked at this psalm, I was in the teaching rotation here at our church in Spain. And I usually start about 2 weeks out before I have to speak someplace, doing my prep. And after about a week of looking at the psalm, I realized I don't know what David's talking about here. And so I kind of set it aside and spoke on something else. And I kept going back to it over a 6-month period. So if you looked at this psalm, if you read it through and thought, what is David talking about? Well, I think you're in good company because not many of us can figure it out at first glance. So how would you understand this idea of seeking God's face? I think most people in the West would think it maybe means, well, let's try harder to be more godly. You know, what would Jesus do that would make God's face happy? Others might think, well, seeking his face is seeking his truth and digging into the Bible and knowing more about who God is and know more about who I am and what that relationship is. That doesn't really touch on what David's trying to say because we have a hard time understanding this. And so we just insert our own meaning into it. And even most Western authors and preachers, I found they made no distinction between a text that says, seek God while he may be found, which means look for God's salvation while you still have the opportunity, and this phrase of seeking God's face. So I'll ask you to set aside whatever definition you currently have of seeking his face. We'll look at Psalm 27 And we'll do a brief overview of this topic of the metaphor of face in the Bible. And what we'll see is that this is truly the answer to the problem that we have regarding our own failings, our perceptions of ourselves, our feelings of being ashamed before God and others. And so we'll let Scripture define this for us. And I believe that we'll start to see the connections and maybe take a step toward experience the um, more full freedom of these things or from these things as God has intended for us. So it's Psalm 27. We'll do a brief overview of seeking his face in Scripture, what it means for us today, what it means for us for tomorrow and the next day. So as you look at this psalm, you see common themes that you see in some of David's psalms. He's surrounded by enemies. False witnesses rise up against him. But in this psalm, unlike the others, David doesn't seem afraid in any place in the psalm. He's fully confident in his eternal destiny. He's fully confident that God is going to protect him in what he's going through in that moment. So if you look at verses 4 and 5 that lead up to verses 8 and 9 that talk about seeking God's face, verse 4 kind of seems to be pointing to David's confidence in his eternal destiny. And we talk a lot about this in the church. And in fact, for some people, I think Christianity has come down to it's all about just eternal salvation, a ticket to heaven. One of my friends always calls it's fire insurance. And so here's David. He says, "One thing I ask from the Lord, this only do I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life." And when David says that, he has this now and forever idea there, to gaze on the beauty of the Lord and to seek him in his temple. So there's David saying, this is what I want. This is my eternal salvation. This is what I seek. And we usually get that right as Christians. We understand that that's part of the message. And then he goes on and he'll talk a little bit about God's guidance and protection for today. And if you think about it as a depth of understanding where my salvation is a very basic understanding of the gospel, and then God's protection of me for today is another level of understanding where we're living and that's impacting our lives. So David says in verse 5, "For in the day of trouble, he will keep me safe in his dwelling, and he will hide me in the shelter of his sacred tent and set me high up on a rock." But then there goes to this third request, and it's a request that goes beyond being just saved, beyond being protected. And I think this is where the psalm really touches our experience, because many of us have 100% confidence in our eternal destiny. Many of us also have a confidence that God is in control of the present and he's going to keep us safe, right? We know we're saved. We know we're safe. Where we start to struggle is in understanding how God views us, what his attitude is toward us. And if you've heard me speak on this theme before, it's because I have seen how many Christians go through their lives confident that they're saved, confident that God is keeping them safe throughout their journey, but then believing that God is like a disappointed, disapproving parent who looks at us and he's shaking his head and he's with a deep sigh, he's going, "What is wrong with her? What's wrong with him? So disappointing." And so when we speak about Christianity being a relationship with God, too many of us have that relationship characterized by us being disappointing and God being disappointed. And it seems to me that Satan has one strategy that he seems to use over and over again. He lies, and then we believe the lie. And this is the lie, that God is your disappointed parent. And David's desire to seek God's face, to see him face to face, to be fully known and fully accepted, I think it reflects his desire to dismantle this lie. He's asking for assurance that he's fully accepted by God his Father, that the relationship is not characterized by God only loving him in an obligatory parental way, but God's joy and enjoyment of relating to David. Many times I've said, Christians seem to understand God loves me, but they struggle answering the question, does he actually like me? So here's what David says. It says in verse 7, hear my voice when I call, Lord. Be merciful to me and answer. My heart says of you, seek his face. Your face, Lord, I will seek. Do not hide your face from me. Do not turn your servant away in anger. You've been my helper. Do not reject me or forsake me, God, my Savior. This idea of seeking God's face is, if he seeks God's face, as God shows him his face, he's not turned away in anger. He's not rejected. He's not forsaken. And just to re-emphasize what he's saying in verse 10, he says, for my father and my mother have forsaken me. So David's saying, I've been exposed to the world, and the verdict of the community is that even my father and mother are saying, you know what? I think we're done with him. And he's asking God for the opposite. Don't hide your face. Hiding your face, his face would be rejection. But show me your face. That's acceptance. And as deep as the rejection is from his mother and father, he's asking for that depth of acceptance from God. And he's confident, continuing in verse 10, he said, for the Lord will receive me. God's not going to turn his face away from me. So this concept of face in the Bible, this will be helpful as you're reading in other places as well. Here's a definition from theologians. I'll read it verbatim here. By face, we do not mean the physical body part, but the use of the term as a metaphor representing a type of interpersonal social honor and identity perfection or protection. Let me read that again so you get it. By face, we do not mean the physical body part, but the use of the term as a metaphor representing a type of interpersonal social honor and identity protection. I have no idea what that means. To me, that is not helpful at all. I'm sure somebody would understand it. I've looked at it a couple of times. It makes no sense to me. So maybe this is best understood or explained using the negative when you want to hide from God's face. If you go all the way back to the creation story and the fall, there's a lot of words about or use of this metaphor of face there. Adam and Eve sin, and when God comes to find Adam, Adam literally says to him, I hid from your face. Now, I couldn't find an English translation that had the word face in it, but it's there in the Hebrew. Adam's literal words are, I was ashamed and I hid from your face. So the shame and deep conviction of being unaccepted, he can't face God because he believes the verdict will be, you're unacceptable, you're a disappointment. So right after Adam and Eve, the next story is all about the face metaphor. This is Cain. So Cain and Abel. Cain offers his unacceptable offering, and it says his face fell. He was ashamed. And God addresses this and asks, why did your face fall? Why did you feel the shame? Here are the verses. But on Cain and his offering, God did not look on with favor. So Cain was angry and his face was downcast. And then the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? So again, the falling of the face, the turning of the face away is all about acceptance. The shame and the anger are so great, though, that Cain, as you know, kills his brother, whose offering was acceptable. And then Cain says to the Lord, once he receives his punishment from God, he says, my punishment is more than I can bear. Today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your face. So the punishment is being driven away from the face of God. And the face here is much more than God's presence, right? God is omnipresent. You're never going to escape from his presence. But Cain's losing association. He's losing relationship with God. God associates with you because you're acceptable to him. And no matter what anybody else says, if God says you are acceptable, it means he wants to be with you. He wants to enjoy your presence. This is what Cain knew that he was losing. And we often don't think about it this way. We talk about enjoying God's presence, right? You come to a worship service and you enjoy the presence of God. But we don't think that that's maybe reciprocated from God. I'm saved, I'm protected, and I'm accepted, but it's not like a disappointed parent who thinks, well, I have no other choice. I love the way Paul describes this in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10, where he says, we are God's workmanship. The Greek words that is there, it means an original work of art. You could very, very well translate that as you are God's masterpiece, right? We actually get our word poetry from that Greek word that is translated workmanship in the New International Version. Anyway, that's how they translate it. Our word poetry comes from that. And I was teaching a Bible study to a group of teenagers, and we got to that verse, and I said, this is like God saying, you are God's poem. You're the poem that God wrote. And there were about 8 girls there, 14 or 15 years old. And it was like deep sighs. They just went, oh, I'm God's poem. And I thought, everybody should respond like these 14-year-old girls did. Everybody should just be astounded that you are God's poem. He sees you as his masterpiece. He's not the disappointed parent, right? He chooses to associate with us. He doesn't hide his face from us because he's not embarrassed. He's not ashamed. And this is why David's so obsessed with seeking God's face and not having God hide his face from him. Because to be accepted, to associate with him, to be face to face with God meant everything to him. When everybody was out to get him, when even his parents were rejecting him, when he felt the verdict of the community, and at that point in his life he was being ridiculed and rejected, he knew for certain, if God doesn't hide his face from David, right? If God is willing to receive, accept, associate, and maybe even enjoy David, David can be sure of his worth. He can be truly content. So take it out of, as we finish up here, take it out of the theoretical, theological. Why is the acceptance and association with God so important, right? How does it affect your day-to-day life? Well, go back to, what are those things that make you feel small? What are those things that, if everybody knew about it, it would just cause you to want to hide? The things where you go, if people really knew me, they would just reject me. If they really knew me, they would think that I'm just a fraud. Well, God is not the disappointed parent. He sees you as his masterpiece. He enjoys you. You should know that the answer to the question, does God even like me, is crystal clear. And so these are the words of David. My heart says of you, seek his face. Seek that deep relationship of acceptance. Your face, Lord, will I seek. That's the one thing I want. Don't hide your face from me, even if my father and my mother have forsaken me and rejected me. Verse 10 says, God, I know that you will receive me, not as a disappointed parent, but as a masterpiece of his grace. So there is the core message of Psalm 27 and what it means to seek the Lord's face. So I pray your blessings on you at Kortright.